Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. "12:30 p.m. 12th of February 2002. Through the open window of the John Howard Centre, 32-year-old Peter inhales the cool air, his gold tooth and dreadlocks standing out against his grey tracksuit and white t-shirt. Like clockwork, a nurse hands him his pill. He swallows it. She notes it. He jokes, yummy, as always. And having had his breakfast and a shower, with his 6-month trial successful, freedom awaits. 2 guards and a nurse escort him to a van. Not a prison van, not in handcuffs, and certainly not in any restraints. Where he sits quietly on the back seat, supping his favourite soft drink, a carton of Ribena. 9 years since he brutally attacked Nisha Sheth with a hammer without any provocation, motive, and since then, very little remorse. A panel of experts and 2 scapegoats had noted his vast improvements and had deemed this self-proclaimed psychopath in the making as no longer a danger to others. Having been released from high-security Rampton Hospital to the medium-security John Howard Centre, by the hour, he would be sitting on a bed, watching telly and drinking tea at the Riverside Hostel. Assessed and monitored, he would remain as a resident until another panel deemed him fit to live on his own. But as long as he didn't break the rules, he could come and go as he pleased. Peter Bryan, the convicted murderer, could now mingle amongst the community, who would be unaware of his crimes as a violent killer, whose doctors couldn't determine if he was managed by his medication, whose diagnosis of schizophrenia couldn't be determined as his symptoms were hard to assess, and who, within 2 years of this day, would brutally murder 2 others while under psychiatric care. Told in full for the very first time, this is Schizophrenic. The Real Fake Peter Bryan, Part 3.
This is the 9 o'clock news.
17th of December 1992. Christopher Clunis entered Finsbury Park Station and, in an unprovoked attack on a stranger, stabbed Jonathan Zito in the face, eyelid and brain. Clunis was a paranoid schizophrenic living in a local hostel who'd been treated at Jamaica's Bellevue Hospital. But when he moved to London in 1996, although he'd been seen by 43 psychiatrists over 4 years, not one of them had accurate copies of his medical records, and no agency was responsible for his care. On the 28th of June 1993 at the Old Bailey, Clunis admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and was detained on a hospital order without limitation of time at Rampton Hospital. An inquest would state, "We do not single out just one person, service or agency for blame. In our view, the problem was cumulative. It was one failure or missed opportunity after another."
The similarities between this and Peter's case were startling. And it had happened just 3 months before Nisha's murder. At 1 p.m, the van pulled up at Riverside, a 24-hour supervised forensic hostel at 337 Seven Sisters Road in North London. A care home for adults with mental health needs, with the aim to monitor and assess each resident in a less clinical setting and to prepare them to live independently and safely in society. Each resident had their own psychiatrist and social worker, and the staff were trained to spot changes in their mood or behaviour, as many experienced freedom for the first time in months or even years. Peter had been there on trial visits before, and they said he was neat, polite, listened intently, and obeyed the rules. His first day was simple. His medication and medical files were handed to the staff. His property was noted. His bank book was put in the safe, and he was assigned a key worker. He went to the shops with a resident and a staff member to buy tobacco. He cooked dinner supervised. He played pool. He watched television. He asked for his head to be shaved bald. He had his pills at 10 p.m. and he went to bed at 12:40 a.m. There were no issues. The next day, Peter agreed he would attend the Warland Day Centre to meet others and learn new skills. He would attend meetings with Vital Drug Agency, follow-ups with his FCPN, his forensic community psychiatric nurse, his drug counsellor at Ad-Action, his social worker Roland. And as skunk was a trigger for his psychosis, he agreed to have his urine regularly tested for drugs. He would be kept busy and occupied by the staff, but part of his therapy was how he would manage his paranoia, hallucinations and delusions safely and appropriately. So given a bus pass, access to money and his own door key, he could come and go as he pleased, as long as the staff knew the place, the people, the timings of where he was going. And settling in, he got a job 15 hours a week as a cleaner in Earl's Court. Riverside was the right place to get Peter on the road to recovery. He was happy, calm, cooperative, and he became good pals with residents known as Nicodemus and Squash, with his nickname being Patchwork. Peter was a resident at Riverside for 2 years. It was a slow and careful process, but then it had to be. The first letter he sent was to his occupational therapist at the John Howard Centre. He wrote,
Hello, I hope you are fine. I am fine and in good health and fine spirits. The staff here are very kind and helpful. The manager keeps telling me to stay away from drugs and no drinking alcohol on the premises. But I don't think you need to worry. I am empowered and I know to say no. Take care. I will try very hard to get out of Riverside and will also be trying to keep up the good behaviour. Yours sincerely, Peter.
Staff were trained to spot his relapse signatures. Signs his medication or treatment wasn't working, needed improving, or that he wasn't complying with the rules. His 3 key relapse signatures were fantasies. Peter knows that when he came off medication, his mental health deteriorated. He felt paranoid, irrational, and his behaviour was socially inappropriate and sexually disinhibited. Illicit drugs. Peter has recognised that smoking cannabis exacerbated his mental health. He said that if he happens to smoke a joint, he would immediately inform his social supervisor. Bad company. Peter recognised that some of the people he related to had criminal backgrounds, so he will be at risk of taking drugs and possible criminal behaviour if he interacts with them. It's not as simple as it seems to assess a paranoid schizophrenic when they're not suffering a psychosis. They don't suddenly swing from being Jekyll to Hyde from one second to the next. Especially someone like Peter, who even experienced psychiatrists would state that his symptoms weren't consistent. Marjorie Wallace, CEO of the mental health charity SANE, stated, "A patient like Peter can mask their illness. They can appear utterly charming, normal and logical, even prior to a psychotic episode, due to the fluctuating nature of schizophrenia, which is exacerbated by medication, stresses and other factors." A later inquest determined that Peter had an unusual type of illness, which allowed him to appear to act normal despite being unwell. a finding it stressed was identified with the benefit of hindsight. Hindsight being a euphemism for 2 more brutal murders. Over the months, the signs were subtle but noted. It happened to many, but not every resident, as they adjust to the freedom, and as in Peter's case, he'd comment,
I feel like I'm already institutionalized.
He struggled to sleep and was sometimes argumentative, which was common, but he wasn't violent. He pushed the boundaries by claiming money for soft drinks he never bought, but nothing major. He started bathing less, smelling bad, and wearing the same clothes, yet everyone has their low moments. And he often complained that the staff were watching him too closely, but surely that was their job. As had been noted at Rampton and John Howard, he was prone to manipulating others. At Riverside, he falsely claimed that he'd been attacked on the street, just so he could find out which resident was aggressor, and he wrote many letters to the company's chief executive, making formal complaints about the staff. In 2003, his second year at Riverside, on occasions he threatened staff and residents. He was found to smell of alcohol. There were suspicions that he was using cannabis. He was hanging out with some youths from the nearby Woodbury Down estate. And when preparing an evening meal,
Peter became very annoyed when a kitchen knife was taken away from him.
He even said,
A red mist came over me.
To the uninitiated, they may think that the warning signs were there. But one instance such as this didn't instantly mean that he would be sent back to John Howard or Rampton, as the whole process was about learning and improving. For the rest of his life, his illness would be a process of adjustments to his treatment and medication. As when and if he was deemed fit to be released, he would need those coping strategies in place when there was no one there to watch over him. Something he didn't have before when he murdered Nisha, which could have stopped him from killing.
This is the 9 o'clock news.
4th of April 2004. Philip Theopoulou attacked Simon Breed, a married father of 2, on his drive in Wood Green. Stabbed 6 times in an unprovoked attack, he died in his wife's arms. 1 year before, Theopoulou had caused thousands of pounds worth of damage to his house and car with a meat cleaver, and diagnosed as a schizophrenic, had been released from St Anne's Hospital 8 months earlier. And although no issues were reported, staff were unaware that he'd stopped taking his antipsychotic medication. Tried at the Old Bailey, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility and was sent to Broadmoor on a hospital order without limitation of time. At an inquest, the mental health trust responsible for his care admitted, I would have expected him to be under a care coordinator, either a doctor, a nurse or a social worker. But after his release, he wasn't. The system had fallen short, and there was an over-reliance on care in the community because of a lack of hospital beds.
Again, the similarities between this and Peter's case was startling. And it would happen just 2 months after Peter's next murder. Peter wanted out of Riverside, not just for freedom, but because he was lonely and looking for love. As far back as April 2002, just 2 months into his stay, Peter had tried to bring back a lady friend to his room after hours. But as this broke the rules, he accepted this and they stayed in the lounge watching television. He tried this repeatedly and became annoyed that he had to seek permission from the staff. As in his words,
I'm a male with physical needs and would like to develop relationships with women.
Residents are encouraged to mix in the community, but bad company is not acceptable. And although by his own admission, Peter is a sexually frustrated virgin, the staff were unaware that the women he was attracted to were either crack users, sex workers, or they were of an extremely young age. At the inquest, the anonymous girl Peter saw as his girlfriend was referred to only as P4. She lived on the Woodbury Down estate immediately opposite the Riverside Hostel, and she was the daughter of another woman he'd met, known only as P6. By then, Peter was 33 years old, and P4 was only 16. As with his medication, his social life had to be a careful balance of freedoms and restrictions. So when P4 knocked on the hostel's door for him, the staff explained to Peter, "This is not a suitable place for young children." He was reminded it is an offence to associate with girls under 16, especially given his past. And he explained,
"I'm not a paedophile, and I am responsible enough for my own actions."
This was a red flag. But he said,
"I did not and would not put anyone in danger."
In November 2003, tested at random, one of his urine samples was positive for amphetamines. Peter denied doing drugs. He challenged it. It was agreed it could have been a false positive caused by his own antipsychotic medication, which happens. And he agreed to be retested, but those results are unknown. From the start, he assured the staff,
"I'm giving it my best shot,"
as his only chance of living a normal life began right here, and if he made a serious mistake, he risked losing all of it and being sent back to Rampton. In late 2003, the Historical, Clinical and Risk Management 20, a checklist of risk factors known as the HCR20, had been used by his forensic CPN, and Peter had a score of 14 out of a possible 20 for past risk. Often his room was messy, he was unkempt, and his relapse signatures were more pronounced. But psychiatrists noted that there was a continued improvement in his mental state. So a plan was being put together to move him out of the low-security Riverside Hostel and into his own low-support flat. The 2009 inquest, held 6 years later, concluded there was no particular failure by any individual. Peter Bryan, who had an atypical mental disorder, did not display the expected signs of schizophrenia and appeared to behave normally even when he was seriously mentally unwell. Other than a couple of minor incidents during his early years at Rampton, he had not displayed any signs of aggressive behavior since he killed Nisha Sheth. Yet that same report admits that at Rampton, John Howard and Riverside, he was able to dupe staff into believing that he was responding to treatment and that he was a model patient.
This is the 9 o'clock news.
2nd of September 2004. John Barrett stabbed Dennis Finnegan to death in an unprovoked attack as he cycled through Richmond Park. 2 years earlier, Barrett, a paranoid schizophrenic, had stabbed 3 people in the outpatients department of St. George's Hospital, all of whom survived. Deemed to have diminished responsibility, Barrett became a restricted patient held on a hospital order without limitation of time at Springfield Hospital. But said to be responding well, a psychiatrist granted him an hour's leave. He left the hospital, bought some knives, and headed to Richmond Park.
Again, the similarities between this and Peter's case was startling. And it would happen just 3 months after his third and final murder. Every time another innocent person was murdered by a paranoid schizophrenic who'd been failed by the system, an inquest would claim that faults had been found and that lessons had been learned. But were they ever learned? In 1979, Winston Williams, whose schizophrenia was exacerbated by drugs, was sent to Broadmoor after 2 attempted murders deemed safe for release, in 1999, he stabbed Kate Casme 77 times. And an inquest later blamed miscommunication by agencies. In 1996, Lynn and Megan Russell were murdered by Michael Stone, a heroin addict with a severe personality disorder, yet an inquest denied that anyone was at fault. Jason Cann murdered healthcare assistant Mamich Chutton at Springfield Hospital, yet the trust was only fined for safety failures. And as recently as 2024 in Nottingham, Valdo Calacane, a paranoid schizophrenic, fatally stabbed 3 people due to serious failings in his psychiatric care. This is just a sample, and although only 6% of UK murders are committed by paranoid schizophrenics, one is one too many, and it's one which could have been preventable, like the murder of Nisha Sheth. In the days prior, it was uncertain if Peter had potentially relapsed. On Wednesday the 4th of February 2004, night staff at the Riverside Hostel observed Peter talking to himself. On Thursday the 5th, he was seen returning at 10:40 p.m. smelling of alcohol, which he denied. Then on Friday the 6th at 2:30 p.m, P6, the mother of Peter's supposed 16-year-old girlfriend, identified only as P4, knocked at the hostel, accompanied by 2 street crime wardens, and alleged he had assaulted her. At 4 p.m, upon his return, Peter was informed he was said to be shocked and stated,
I was at the flat to watch DVDs, and that while I was there my phone went missing. It might have fallen out my pocket.
And while he was in the bathroom, P4
Had come on to me.
He admitted he'd felt up her breasts and genitals. She asked him to leave. He refused, so she pulled a knife on him. After that, he stated that he left. Her family were afraid to get the police involved because the girl had protected herself with a knife. That was his version of the incident, which had stark similarities to the fantasy of the attack on Nisha, in which he claimed she asked, "Make me, rape me." But the truth by eyewitnesses was very different. Thursday the 5th of February at 9 p.m, 5 hours after dusk. The night was cold, with a light drizzle. As is typical of life on the Woodbury Down estate, a series of 5-story blocks of flats owned by the council for the borough's neediest. With nothing to do and nowhere to go, the kids were bored. With few able to afford even a basic Nokia 3310 to play games like Snake 2 or Space Impact, or a CD player with a tragically tinny speaker to play music, many resorted to graffiti, vandalism, starting a fight or a fire in a bin. P4 was hanging outside of her block with an unnamed female when Peter and 2 males approached. Peter said,
Where's your dad?
P4 replied,
Dunno.
Can I come up to yours? I got a new DVD.
possibly Kill Bill Volume 2 or a dodgy pirate copy of SWAT.
I want to see if it works.
She knew him and agreed. A while later, as one of Peter's friends left, saying,
I felt uncomfortable being in her bedroom without her mum or dad being in the house.
leaving Peter, his pal, her friend, and P4. For no reason, like he, a 34-year-old man, was a teenage boy, he started coughing in her face as he knew it would annoy her. Out of nowhere, he grabbed her wrists, threw her onto the bed, pinned her arms with her knees so she couldn't move, and then he slapped her face. She said,
I couldn't breathe. I got one hand free.
but he started biting her and slapping her until she realized that her fake nails had broken and her toenail was bleeding. Wriggling free from this large, powerful man, she went to the bathroom to wash it, and he followed her in. Cupping his hands under the water and throwing it into her face, as if this was all a game, unable to sense her anger or to see her tears. She slapped him and barged past, shouting, "Get out of my way!" But it was then that he followed her into the kitchen, and according to P4, he sexually assaulted her. This was a 16-year-old child, trapped in a room with a 34-year-old man. The report stated, he walked up behind her, put his left hand over her mouth so she couldn't scream, and put his right hand down her trousers, past the elasticated waistband of her tracksuit bottoms. She said she felt really scared, terrified as he loomed over her. But before his hand reached into her knickers, she grabbed a knife. He knocked it out of her hand, so she punched and kicked him with all of her might. Running into the bedroom, as he kept coming towards her, she threw whatever she could at him. A pot of cream, some pieces of wood, and when one of them broke, she kept hitting him, screaming for him to get out of her house. As P4 pushed Peter towards the flat's front door and out of her life. But before he left, he warned her.
You better mind yourself. You don't know what I'm capable of.
That was it. In comparison to what he'd done before, it may seem like a little incident, but it had been 11 years since he'd been incarcerated at Rampton, John Howard and Riverside, and that was his first real act of violence since Nisha's murder. Across the decade, he'd been monitored and assessed, medicated and educated to the point where he was declared no longer a danger to the public and fit to be released. Throughout 2003 and early 2004, although they were often subtle, he had serious relapse signatures, such as drink, theft, anger, delusions, rambling, inappropriate and sexually aggressive behavior, as well as two of the triggers that he'd promised he'd stay away from: illicit drugs and keeping bad company. It was like a warning from the past and a precursor of dangers to come. Escalating this incident to the appropriate people, his forensic CPN noted that as Peter denied that anything untoward had happened, it was being discussed by his RMO and MAPA, the multi-agency public protection arrangement, so that they could investigate the incident in more detail. That night, Peter seemed down, knowing that if the allegation was proven to be true, he risked being recalled to Rampton and losing his freedom. So he stayed in his room, took his pills, and went to bed. He wasn't angry or upset. He was well behaved and admitted to the staff he was scared by the recent events. The next night, he told his forensic CPN that when he was leaving the hostel at 10 p.m, a car flashed its lights, and inside were sat several men. An unnamed resident confirmed that one of the men was him, that he'd been forced into the car, ordered to point Peter out, that the men's plan was to enter Riverside using his key, bundle Peter into the boot, drive him away, and kill him. The resident, said to be reliable, was scared, and he asked to be moved from Riverside because he feared for his life, having told the staff. With possible death threats swirling around, and the safety of the staff and residents at Riverside at risk, the manager notified Stoke Newington Police Station, and a plan was formed on what to do next. The safest option was to put Peter in a police cell or to return him to high-security Rampton Hospital. But with the sexual assault allegation still being investigated, none of those were appropriate. As his mental health was clearly deteriorating, he was admitted to the Topaz ward, a low-security psychiatric unit at Newham General Hospital, for a psychiatric assessment, but also for his own safety. 1 week later, he would brutally murder and cannibalize his second victim. Part 4 of Schizophrenic, The Real Fake Peter Bryan, continues next week.